Good morning. Today we're learning a sikha having to do with the mishnayos that we say before and after we say each parak in Pirkei Avos, which we're going to begin to do beginning from Pesach. The Shabbos between Pesach and Shavuos, we learn Pirkei Avos, and according to our minhag, we continue to do so the entire summer. And we know that we always preface the Pirkei Avos with a certain Mishnah, and we conclude with a certain Mishnah. And today's Sikha, which is the second Sikha of the project for this week, found in Likutei Sichos Yud Zayin, discusses these two Mishnayos, and we're really in for a very special treat today. Before I begin, I want to dedicate our learning to the schus of Refuah Shlema, Ukreva, and Nisi, to Harav Yosef Yitzchak ben Sima Chasya. And I also want to share the good news that the baby who we davened for the mother last week when we were learning, the baby was born Baruch Hashem b'shal tova mitzlachas, and he was just named Aryeh Lev. So the class is also in the schus of Aryeh Lev, Zehakaton Gadol Yiyeh, and he should bring a lot of Yiddish nachas to his parents and to his family. And he is the nephew of one of our classmates, Rachel Spiro, and the child of two Binghamton alumni. So now we will begin the Sikha, Seif Aleph. Rabbi Chananya ben Akashya Omer, Rabbi Chananya ben Akashya always says, Ratza Kadosh Baruch Hu l'zakis es Yisrael. Hashem wants to give merit to Bnei Yisrael. Lefichach hirba lahem Torah mitzvahs. Therefore, the Eibishter gave us abundant mitzvahs. Shenemar, as it says, Hashem chafetz leman tzidkoi. Hashem desires, for the sake of his righteousness, yagdil Torah v'yadir, to make the Torah greater and to bring it more glory. Maimer zeh shel Rabbi Chanina ben Akashya. So this saying, this teaching of Rabbi Chananya ben Akashya, even though this Mishnah is found at the end of Maseches Makos, not in Maseches Avos, not in Pirkei Avos. Minhag Yisrael la'amar la'achar kol perek mi Pirkei Avos. It is nevertheless the custom to say this Mishnah after you conclude every perek, every chapter of Pirkei Avos. V'hatam lazeh. And why is this the custom? Kifi shemefarish Rashi, as Rashi explains, lefi sheyesh ba siyum noeh, because this is a pleasant conclusion. Nohagu kol ha'am la'amrei b'seif kol perek u'perek. So therefore it became the minhag, it became our practice to say this Mishnah at the end of every perek that you finished. Lefi she'ein oimrim kaddish al Mishnah ela al haggadah. Because the custom is that you don't say Kaddish after you finish a Mishnayos, but you do after you finish a teaching from the Gemara. That's an Agada, that's Agadata, that's kind of a story or a teaching. And so that's why this Mishnah was chosen. And when you hear people say Kaddish who are Chiyuvim or Kaddish on a yard site, you know, they say the Mishnayos, and then they say Rabbi Chananya ben Akashya Omer. They say this Mishnah, and then they say Kaddish. Omnam, however, liyos asher kol inyani heterehim b'taklas hadiyuk, v'chein minhag Yisrael terehi. But because everything having to do with Torah has to be precise, and because a minhag is, there's nothing slight or trivial about a minhag. It's Terehi, it's part of Torah. And especially because a number of the commentaries on Mishnayos incorporated this Pirkei Avos in their commentary on Pirkei Avos rather than in Makos. Visham Perusha move on, and their Parish is understood there in Pirkei Avos rather than in Makos. So it's I'm sorry, Pirusha. So move on. It's understood from this. So it's understood that it's not just a pragmatic, utilitarian move that we say this Mishnah because it has a nice ring to it, it's pleasant, and you need Agadata in order to say Mishnayos, but rather that there is an inherent link between this Mishnah and the contents of Pirkei Avos. Kemoikein, Minhag Yisrael Loimar Lefnei Kol Perek Pirkei Avos. And in like fashion, there's a minhag that before we start saying any perek of Pirkei Avos, we say the Mishnah Kol Yisrael Yesh Lam Chelek Olam Haba, that all of Israel has a place in Olam Haba, and for us, this Mishnah is especially familiar, obviously. But its place, Shehi Mishnah b'Masechah Sanhedrin. But actually, this Mishnah is found in Sanhedrin. Now, the Rebbe says, Hamachana Hamashuta ben Shtei HaMishnayos, the common denominator between these two Mishnayos, Hanemois b'Tchilaso B'Siyam, that are said as a preface to saying Pirkei Avos, and then at its conclusion, Hu b'Shteihem Mudgeshes Ma'alosam Shel Yisrael. In that both you have underscored the great wonder, the great Maila of Bnei Yisrael. The Mishnah Kol Yisrael, in the Mishnah that we say before, we say Kol Yisrael, we underscore Hayosim Neitzer Matay Maseh Yodai, that each one of Bnei Yisrael is a branch of Hashem's plantings, of the plantings that Hashem planted with his own hands, as it were. Ube Mishnah Rabbi Chananya ben Akashya, and in the Mishnah with which we conclude our study of Pirkei Avos, we talk about Sheribu HaTorah Mitzvahs Hu B'Shvil Yisrael, that the proliferation in Torah and in mitzvahs is for the purpose of Bnei Yisrael. That Hashem wanted to give schusim to Bnei Yisrael, and therefore he gave them much Torah and many mitzvahs. Sarach lahavin, but we have to understand, Pirkei Avos, generally speaking, these Mishnayos of Pirkei Avos, this Masechet, Machilim Kiyadua Hayrais Vanhagos Umidas Tevos, includes, as is well known, practices and advice about comporting oneself in a proper way. Ad lemile de chasidusa, until it also includes words of chasidus, and the understanding here is lifnim mishurs hadin. It teaches us about going above and beyond what is actually mandatory. So, managea lekach inin malasam shel Yisrael. So, what is the connection between Pirkei Avos, which seems to be comprised of pithy aphorisms and teachings and good advice? Some of it is commonsensical. Some of it urges us to go above and beyond. But what is the connection between this and underscoring the greatness of Bnei Yisrael? Si'if Beis. V'yuvam bahaktim habir b'mishnasai. So we can only understand this first by prefacing with more of an explanation on these Mishnayos. We need to understand these Mishnayos a little bit more deeply. Habartanura mefaresh. So the Bartanura is to Mishnayos what Rashi is to Chumash. In other words, the de facto most basic expositor on Mishnayos. And the Bartanura explains, Lefichach hibralhem Turim mitzvahs. Therefore, Hashem heaped upon us many mitzvahs. Kigoin parsha shkotze v'ramashim. For instance, all the halachas having to do with reptiles and creeping, crawling creatures. Kidei laharbais schar kishehem b'telam behem. In order to give us a greater schar, well, we abstain from these creatures. Even though most likely we would not eat them anyway because they're absolutely disgusting. Now, what's interesting about this is that there's certain parts of the world where people do eat these. They eat chocolate-covered grasshoppers and other such gastronomical delights. But still, there is probably resistance on the part of many people to eating these kinds of things. So the Bartanura says that that's an example of what it means here, B'lehem Torah mitzvahs. The Eibishter made certain things prohibited, even though we wouldn't go in that direction anyway. But that way we get an additional schus by not eating chocolate-covered grasshoppers. And in like fashion, we could apply the same logic to aspects of Torah and its learning. HaKadosh Baruch Hu kolal b'Torah inyanim ke'ela shagam b'lav hachi muvanim mitzad seichel ha'adam. The Eibishter included in Torah things that we might come to understand with our own seichel. But why was it included in Torah? Kedei laharbei schar gam avor limudam, in order to add on, to heap upon us greater schar. So when we learn these things that we might have come to by our own logic or understanding anyway, but since it's part of Torah, it gives us an additional schar. But in accordance with this perush of the Bartanura, then the Rebbe says it's not understood. The Rebbe poses two questions. Aleph, Lashon HaMishnah here b'lehem. First of all, the Lashon, the exact terminology that's being used here b'lehem, that Hashem made abundant for them, meaning for us, for Bnei Yisrael. Because if you're going to take the Bartanur's explanation that this is in order to give us more sechar, in order to give us more zechut, in order to make us more meritorious, so then this is a reason for only certain ones of the mitzvahs. But this would not answer the question, generally speaking, on most mitzvahs and most of the Torah, because it would be very, very hard to argue that most mitzvahs are things we would come to of our own accord, that most Torah we would come to understand with our own logic. So this could only be a reason for a certain percentage of the Torah. That's one problem or one question on this parish of the Bartanura. The second, haloshin lizakos es Yisrael. So the Rebbe questions hirba, the word hirba, that Hashem made abundant, and now he's questioning the term lizakos, to make meritorious. Ki leperushay hayamatin linkoid beloshin hamavataz is inyan haschar, because in accordance with what the Bartanur is explaining, he should have the pasuk, in other words, the Mishnah, should have used a term that is more appropriate for expressing what is really being imparted here, which is it's about giving us more schar, it's about giving us more reward. Kegoin laharbas escharam. Instead of saying lizakos es Yisrael, to give them more merit, it should have said to make more abundant their reward. So Hashem gives us more mitzvahs so that he can reward us in greater measure. Those are the two questions on the Bartanura. Seif Gimel. Harambam Mefarish is a Mishnah Hanal. Now the Rebbe is going to bring how the Rambam explains this Mishnah. And the Rambam says, Ki k'sheyikayim adam mitzvah mitayim mitzvahs kiroi ukohegin. When a person will observe one of the 613 mitzvahs properly, v'lo yishatev ima kavana mechuvenes ha'elam b'shum panim, and there will be no ulterior motive. There'll be no other motive except to serve Hashem properly. Ela sheyasa isa l'shma, but this Jew will do it only for the sake of Hashem, me'ava, from a love for God, v'chulei, etc. So when a Jew does a mitzvah properly and completely, and does it out of love simply because they want to serve Hashem, then they merit the life of the world to come. Amar Rabbi Chananya, and so it is on this that Rabbi Chananya taught Ki hamitzvos b'yosem harbe efshar shelo yasa adam b'chayev achas mehem al mas kunta v'shleimusa uba'asoisei isa hamitzvah techaye nafshe ba'isa ma'isa. So what's Rabbi Chananya saying? that the reason why the Eibishter here b'lahem mitzvahs, why did the Eibishter give us so many mitzvahs? Because, well, I'm jumping the gun. That's in the next paragraph, what I wanted to say now. So Chananya says that he's addressing the fact that what's going to happen if there are so many mitzvahs that a person has to do, and they're not going to do it properly. Maskunta means they're not going to be able to do it for the true purpose, and they're not going to be able to do it completely. And it's only if they do it for the true purpose and they do it completely that they will be able to complete a mitzvah that will techaya nafshi, that will vivify their soul. So therefore, the Rambam learns that therefore Chananya ben Akashya comes to teach us in the Mishnah, here b'lehem Torah mitzvahs. What did Hashem do? He gave us many mitzvahs. How does this help? Because since Hashem gave us an abundance of mitzvahs, it gives us more chances that we should be able to do at least one of them completely and totally and in consummate fashion. That's why he gave us so many. So in other words, you give more chances, you up the statistics, the statistical possibility that somebody will be able to do at least one of them properly, completely, keeping all the aspects of it, all the details, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's what the Rambam says. And that's why Rabbi Chananya finishes with saying, Hashem did this because he wanted to give us merit. So by giving us many, many mitzvahs, he creates a possibility for us to do at least one of them or some of them completely and totally and perfectly, and to get the schos from it. However, but the Rebbe says, but in addition to the fact that this still doesn't answer the question I had on the Bartanura, if anything, this just gives us more reason why it should have said that the Eibishter wanted to give us more schar. Instead, the Mishnah says the Eibishter wanted to give us merit. But the Rebbe says, but etzem ha-perish derish bir. But the actual perish itself of the Rambam necessitates explanation. The Rebbe says that from the Rambam's explanation, at least so far at first blush, it appears that the fact that Hashem gave us many mitzvahs is not because there is some wonderful superlative characteristic about the mitzvahs themselves. It's only utilitarian. It's a conduit. Inyan tafel b'shvil mitzvah by dedes. It's actually ancillary. It's secondary to the mitzvah itself. Haba lahavtiach sheyehudi yikayim mitzvah achaz al maskunta ushlemusa. It's simply creating an insurance policy that a Jew should be able to do at least one mitzvah with the right intention and to keep it fully and properly. So in other words, the Rebbe says, I'm bothered by the fact that it seems that the Rambam is saying that here b'lehem Torah mitzvahs, that Hashem gave us a lot of mitzvahs, it's not the pshat that the mitzvahs themselves are so important, but the Eibishter is increasing our chances of us doing something correctly. Because in order to get the schar, to vivify our neshama, it has to be done for the right purpose, it has to be done in the right way. And so the Eibishter is really being kind to us, but it doesn't speak to the greatness of the mitzvahs themselves. So we go to Seif Dalet. And before the Rebbe gives us an explanation on this, he asks a number of questions, another 4 questions. Aleph, Rabbi Chananya ben Akashya madgish. Rabbi Chananya ben Akashya underscores, Ratza Kadosh Baruch Hu lezakois es Yisrael. Hashem wanted to be mezaka. He wanted to make us meritorious. Ve'ilu b'pasuk. But in the pasuk that is brought by the Mishnah as a proof text, Hadgasha, what's underscored in the pasuk is Hashem chafetz leman tzidkoi. Hashem desired this because of his righteousness. Leman hatzedek shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because of his righteousness. So which is it? Is it that God wanted to do this because he wants to make us more meritorious? Or is this because Hashem wants to do this because it aligns with his righteousness? That's one question. Base. The pasuk medubarak aides Torah, and in the pasuk it continues and it says Yagdil Torah v'yadir. It speaks only about making the Torah more exalted and exponentially greater. But what about the mitzvahs? It doesn't address the mitzvahs. So normally we know that when a Mishnah or the Gemara tells us something, and then it brings a pasuk, the pasuk is meant to bolster what the teaching is. But in this case, the Rebbe says, one part of the pasuk seems to kind of undermine what we thought the teaching was, because it's saying that the Eibusha does this because of his tzedek, because of his righteousness. And that seems to be different than what the Mishnah is saying, that it's in order to give us chos. And then the second part of that pasuk says that it's about lahagdil Torah v'yadir, to make the Torah greater and to exalt it. And then what does that have to do with the mitzvahs? And the Mishnah is about Torah mitzvahs. Here balahem Torah mitzvahs. Base. The second question, the pasuk medubarak. Sorry, that was the second question. The third question. We also have to ask, why is this pasuk that is being brought as a proof text, why does it contain terminology that is not correlated to the terminology of the Mishnah? Because b'mishnah nemar Ratza HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Mishnah begins Hashem wanted. Pasuk, but in the pasuk that's brought down again to support this idea, it says Hashem chafetz. So Ratzain wanted, chafetz desired. And while we might just, say, oh, whatever, just synonyms, no big deal, obviously it is a big deal. And Chassidus speaks about the difference quite extensively, and we will talk about it slightly today. Even though we have a rule that the syntax and the diction of Torah shebechsav is different than the Torah sheba'al peh, lashon Torah la'atzma, lashon chachamim la'atzman. This is a rule. Imzois, but nonetheless, Meitzim bekama mekaymas, we find very often shekasher Chazal loimdim inim mesuyim mipasuk, that when Chazal learn something from a pasuk in the Torah, he mishtamshim bidvarehem belashon pasuk. They use the terminology of the pasuk in their own teaching. Uledugma, and for example, and using the terminology we're looking at today, and the same subject matter, Torah mitzvahs, the Rebbe brings down, right? This is a very famous teaching. Those of us who have boys and had to teach yeshiva, had to choose yeshivas, and maybe we thought a different yeshiva would be better, but our child wanted a certain yeshiva, and very often this teaching is trotted out that a person should learn in the place where they want to learn, where their heart desires to learn. She'nehmar ki im b'tayis Hashem cheftzai. So you could see that that same terminology, chayfetz, is being used in both. Mimtzei chefzecha. Chefzecha asurin chefzi shamayim mutarin. The Rebbe is bringing a whole bunch of examples where the lashon, the terminology used by Chachamim, correlates with the terminology used in Tanakh regarding the idea of Torah, and specifically using the term chayfetz, which is about desire. So why in this Mishnah do we have disjunction between the teaching of the Mishnah, Ratzah Kadosh Baruch Hu, but then bringing down a pasuk, Hashem chafetz? Dalet. The fourth question is, HaMishnah meres lefichach hirbalem Torah mitzvahs. Right? The Mishnah says, therefore Hashem caused that it should be an abundance of Torah mitzvahs. Shaperish hapashat shel hirba hu ribui b'mispar. The simple explanation of hirba is quantitative, many, ukamos, quantitatively many mitzvahs. But it would seem that in the pasuk that's being brought down, that this is about making the Torah exalted and greater. Shemashmai gadlus b'chayzik be'echos. It would seem that the simple explanation of lahagdil yagdil Torah v'yadir is a qualitative statement, that you want to make the Torah more greater and more glorious, and so on and so forth. So again, we have a disjunction between what the Mishnah seems to be saying and what this pasuk that is being brought down as a proof text is imparting. Seif Hey. Nikudas habir b'chol zeh. So the Rebbe says, here is the nikudas, the main point of the explanation to understand all of these questions. Again, why do we say this Mishnah before we start saying Pirkei Avos? Why do we say it after? And then the specific questions asked on the Mishnah, and specifically the way in which the proof text seems to not align so perfectly with the teaching in the Mishnah. So Rebbe says like this: Haribui, the proliferation, Torah mitzvahs hanidu b'mishnasei, of Torah mitzvahs that is being mentioned in our Mishnah, eina kefi shenitan lahavim bepashtos umiloshem perish hamishnayos. It's not what you would think at first blush, and it's not in accordance with the mefarshim. Madua nitzdabu al Torah mitzvahs shazeu mispar meruba. Why indeed were we commanded on 613 mitzvahs, which is a large number? Shekain, because the Rebbe says in truth, ein kol tam a yisoid hegyoni kama hayatzarich liyos mispar mitzvahs. There really is no reason or logical underpinning for exactly how many mitzvahs we should have been commanded. And for any number that would be chosen, we could ask, why not more? Why not less? Ella. But rather, HaMishnah misyacheses le'uvda ki b'Torah mitzvahs meitzim ribui ba'ose inyan b'noisei atzmai. But rather, what the Mishnah is actually relating to is that in Torah mitzvahs, you could find an abundance, a proliferation that deal with the same topic. Kilomar, that is to say, let's say, for argument's sake, that we need to be commanded on all the 613 things. It would have been eminently possible to bundle many of the subsidiary mitzvahs under one larger category of mitzvah. And in the exact wording and in the teaching of Chazal, we have a famous teaching that David HaMelech was able to distill all of the mitzvahs into 11. So it would have been enough. If David Melch was able to do it, it would have been enough that we get 11 mitzvahs. Then we have the famous teaching of Reb Sadia going, that all of the mitzvahs are encapsulated in Aseres HaDibros. We see it could have been enough to have 10 mitzvahs. And I'm sure people are familiar. B'Chavakuk, first B'Micha, B'Chavakuk, everything could be distilled. Ella shebechol mitzvah me'oisan eser ay achadasar hayunechlolim kama v'kama pratim. But if it would have been that way, then there would have been many subsidiary details in each one of these larger mitzvahs. Because as it is, even when it's subdivided in 613, every mitzvah has so many details. So imagine what would have been if there would have been less mitzvahs. So now we're in a better position to understand what the Rambam was explaining. If we would have only had fewer mitzvahs, but each mitzvah would have had so many subsidiary details, how would it have been possible for a Jew to perform a mitzvah with the proper intention and to perform that mitzvah completely and in consummate fashion? And we might even say more than this. If a Jew would have trespassed, would have transgressed even one aspect of those, let's say, mega mitzvahs, then the whole mitzvah would have been missing something. It would have not had completion. Even though the Jew would have kept all the other details. So in other words, the Rebbe is saying that the Rambam is explaining that the only way that we could get the schus for a mitzvah is by the Eibishter here b'lehem Torah mitzvahs. The Eibishter gave us an abundance, which means he broke them down. Even though it wasn't necessary l'chayr to break them down, he broke them down. So it should be more manageable. Baby steps, baby bites. And even so, it's not such a simple thing to do a mitzvah for the right purpose and to do it completely, because even so, the mitzvahs are multifaceted, as it were. But had they been these mammoth mitzvahs, it would have been nigh impossible to achieve integrity, in a complete integrity in observance of any one of these mitzvahs. Vav. So that's al pi pshat, al pi nigla. Ubipnimius ha'inyan. Because you can't clean for Pesach just on the level of nigla. You can't. So we need this. Kol mitzvah ve'inyan b'Torah shoyne mimishnehu. Every mitzvah and every inyan in Torah is distinct. It's different from every other. And often enough, it's even antithetical. Beginning with the very general binary of positive mitzvahs and negative mitzvahs, mitzvahs hasei and mitzvahs leisasei. Then you have achilukum shel edus chukim and mishpatim. Then you have the famous differentiation between mitzvahs that are testimony to very pivotal things that happen in our history or ideas in our theology. Chukim, these are the statutes that are transrational, and mishpatim, these are what we might call torts, eminently logical. Then we have ad l'hischalku shel Torah mitzvahs. Then we have the subdivision to 630 mitzvahs. Asher kol mitzvah, and each one of these mitzvahs, machila toichen tam b'kavana, misuyamin, includes specific content, reason, and intention. Ukamay came b'Torah, and we have the same thing when we learn Torah. Hechal mischalku shel arbas ifanim. Beginning famously with Pardes, with the 4 ways in which anything in Torah could be learned: Pshat, the simple; Remez, that which is alluded to; Drash, the homiletics; and Soid, the esoteric. Pshat, Remez, Drash, and Soid. Then we have the Hachilukim Shel Memtes Panim Tamei, Memtes Panim Tar. We have a famous teaching that there are at least 49 ways in which you could argue that something is Tamei, and 49 ways in which you can argue that something is Tar. Then we have the famous teaching Shivim Panim L'Torah, that there are at least 70 ways in which you can understand everything in Torah. V'yaser mizu, and even more, Shishim Ribu Perushim B'chol Echad Mehafanim Haniskarim B'Torah. There are no less than 600,000 ways to understand on every one of the aforementioned 4 strata of learning Torah, Pardes, Pshat, Remez, Drash, and Sait. So clearly, there's a lot of multiplicity. There's a lot of diversity. So now this necessitates understanding. One Torah with all of its mitzvahs given by one God. And the whole reason is in order to reveal that Hashem is one and His name is one. As to showcase and to broadcast the absolute unity of Hashem. Move on Ephai. Asher gam b'avodasa shel Yehudi amur lishtake b'chol mitzvah oise kavana v'tachlis achas v'yechida. And so it stands to reason that in the avodah of a Jew, in each aspect of our avodah, there has to be reflected this kavana, this intention, one and only intention, tunnel vision. Lifoil es hakishur v'es achdus kavyachol shel mekayim hamitzvah im HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's all to effectuate this bond, this unity between the one who fulfills the mitzvah and Hashem Echad. Shehu achdus hapshuta, and this is unqualified unity. And the same thing when we learn Torah, it's all about uniting with who gave the Torah, through grasping the Torah through our intellect. And the same thing when it comes, again, what's the point of Torah mitzvahs? To take away the helem, to take away that which shrouds and obscures and obfuscates that which vivifies the world, its creator, Hashem. And because of the Helem v'Hester, Shabi'ita, because of the Helem and Hester, Kayemes Tchunas Haribui v'Hapirid b'Chol Inyanei Olam. Because there is Helem v'Hester, therefore there exists multiplicity, multifariousness, diversity, plurality in every aspect of this world. But what is the point of learning Torah? La'asos mirshus harabim shel ha'olam rishus hayachid. The whole point is to take the world, which presents as a Rishus Harabim, a marketplace of ideas and isms and ideologies and so on and so forth, and to create from it all a Rishus Hayachid, a place that in manifest fashion is owned and reflects only one thing, obviously the Eibishter. Through revealing the achdus of Hashem in the world. So if the whole thing of Torah mitzvahs is unity, 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 get to the oneness, strip away all the layers of veneer and facade to reveal the one unifying factor, why there seem to be so much multiplicity in the Torah itself. Al kach masbira ha-Mishnah, therefore the Mishnah explains, Ratza Kadosh Baruch Hu lezakos es Yisrael lefichach hibra lehem Torah mitzvos. And that is answering the question of why the Mishnah uses the term lezakos and doesn't talk about schar, but rather about merit. Why? Because the word merit, hu miloshen zichuch, is etymologically linked to the term of refinement. This is something we could stop and talk about for such a long time, but we're not going to. But the idea that the ultimate schar is the refinement that we merit through engaging in the Torah mitzvahs. So what's the merit? The merit is that you become refined. And therefore, the Eibusha gave us Torah mitzvahs. Okay, so this is very, very gishmaka in here. The Eibusha didn't want just that there should be more bittul on the part of Bnei Yisrael to godliness. The Eibusha wasn't just looking for self-abnegation. Give it up to God. But also to effectuate the idea of us being refined. And what's the difference between just asking for bittul and wanting us to be refined? What's the difference? The concept of bittul is that a person loses their sense of self, and in this way they cleave onto God. And therefore, although a person is comprised of so many different energies and different limbs and different aspects, in fact, there is so much differentiation that we have, according to our tradition, 248 limbs and 365 sinews and arteries, etc., etc. And still in all, but the truth of the matter is that there is no efficacy to this differentiation when it comes to bittul, to self-nullification or abnegation. Says bittul. So when it comes to affecting bittul and the lack of self-existence, none of this differentiation actually is part of the equation. And therefore, when you talk about bittul, the differentiation is not part of the discussion. It's a more general thing. The person, most generally speaking, is mevatel themselves to Hashem. On the other hand, actually, probably in contradistinction, but when you're talking about refinement, the inyan of refinement, Adam Gufa, Evara, Vigidav, Mizdachachim, Vinasim Davar Echad Melikus. So, but zichuch is about something else. Bittul, you could say, is almost about like shutting yourself down. Zichuch is about each and every aspect of the person becoming refined and becoming one with Hashem. The Khan Adraba, and in this avoid, on the contrary, Yesh Mishkal Chashuv Liriba Hischalko Shalivorim Bagidim. Here, the multiplicity and the multifariousness of the aspects of the person become very, very important. Mishum Sha Hizdachachus Kol Koyach Eber Vegid. Because in refinement, that has to take place in specific manner regarding each limb and each aspect of the person. So if you want to talk about bittul, so just be mevatel yourself. Just be mevatel yourself. But if you want to talk about refinement, so every aspect of the person has to be treated individually and very distinctly in order for it to be refined. And so here, it's very important to talk about the variety and the multiplicity. ומכיוון שהקדוש ברוך הוא רוצה לפעול אצל ישראל in הזיכוך לזכויס, and since Bnei Hashem wanted to affect by us not just bittul, Hashem was not looking for ottomans, for puppets, for robots, that we should shut ourselves down and just sit pretty and just ask how high should we jump. But the Eibush was looking to refine us. Therefore, lefichach hirba lehem Torah mitzvahs. Specifically for that reason, the Eibush gave us an abundance of Torah mitzvahs. Mikan noivim hariba v'schalkus b'Torah mitzvahs. Actually, the Rebbe is saying that it's from the very fact that we are so complicated and so multifaceted. It is from that fact that it flows, that there should be so many different mitzvahs and so many ways of understanding the Torah. Mishum sheliklal mitzvah inyana hamiyuchad hapel zichuch b'koyach eber v'gid mesuyam ba'adam v'chein b'chelik mesuyam ba'elam. Because every mitzvah has a different and distinct inyan about it that can effectuate a refinement of a certain aspect of the person, and also has the ability to affect the part of the world in a very specific way. And the same thing is true about Torah. Hinyanim hashoinim b'hamechulakim b'Torah poyalim zichur b'ifanim shoinim shel geder haseichel. The very many different strata and substrata and aspects of the Torah and how it's learned effectuate a refinement in different ways on the different aspects of our cognitive abilities. And we all know that there's certain parts of the Torah that we resonate with more than others. And that's one way of understanding what we say constantly, every person has a chelek of Torah that is specific to them, that speaks to them in a different way, or that they, like we say in Yiddish, they kochen, they resonate with, and they like to repeat a lot, and so on and so forth. Every part of Torah is distinct and speaks to a different part of our intellect. And I'm being told that we should go to footnote 37, 38. 37, Laha'ir Mishar HaGagulim, Sham. If you look into the Sefer Shar HaGagulim, Hanashames Haim Samach Ribui, HaTorah Hi Sherish Nishames. So we know that there are 600,000 mega souls from which all souls are derived. And the Torah is the sherish of the neshamas, kemimeno chutzva uba nishrashu, because the souls were hewn out from and are sourced in, and v'lachein, and therefore yesh b'Torah samach ribu pirushim. Therefore, there's 600,000 pirushim in the Torah, because every neshama is correlated with a different pirush. Thank you, Chani. So now we're Sif Ches. Omnam, however, tzarach lahavin. So based on what the Rebbe has now told us, we have to understand. From the perspective of the Achdus Hashem, the unqualified Achdus of Hashem, Torah mitzvahs should have been presented without this differentiation, without the multifariousness and all the different strata and facets, etc., etc. Because Hashem is echad. And then, according to this, the fact that Hashem gave us an abundance of Torah mitzvahs is only in order to be able to refine us. You'd say Efa, so it appears shaharibui b'Torah mitzvahs mahave kavyachol yurida. So it seems that the multiplicity in Torah and mitzvahs creates a descent. I'm sorry, it creates a descent which doesn't seem to jibe, and it doesn't seem to be connected so much with the essence of Torah mitzvahs, which is all about unqualified unity. Valkach mevi Mishnah as a pasuk Hashem chafetz l'man tzidkoi yagdil ter v'yadir. And therefore, the Mishnah brings down this pasuk, a pasuk about which the Rebbe questioned a number at three different aspects of this pasuk. The Rebbe questioned, how does it jibe with the Mishnah? But now the Rebbe is going to say, but you're going to see why exactly only this pasuk could serve as a proof text for what we are learning. Sha'adrab, on the contrary, haribui b'torah mitzvahs, poel kavyachal hagdola v'ha'adara b'torah. Through this pasuk, we're going to learn that when Bnei Yisrael keep the mitzvahs, the multiplicity of Torah and mitzvahs actually causes kavyachal a exaltedness and an amplification of the greatness of the Torah. V'zois mishom, and this is because Hashem chafetz laman tzidkoi. And now we have to understand, what does it mean, Hashem chafetz laman tzidkoi? That Hashem desires for the sake of his righteousness. Seif tes. Hezber hadvarim. The explanation of these things is as follows. Mivur be'inyan nis'aba kadosh baruch hu liyos lo'dir b'dachtainim. It's explained regarding the famous teaching that Hashem desired a dwelling place, a domicile, an abode in the lower realm. Asher pnimius hadira hi lador v'lishkoin b'neshamis Yisrael v'chulei sheyiyu knesses Yisrael mochain l'shifta yisparach. We know that the innermost kavana of this is that the dwelling place should be, and the resting should be in the souls of Bnei Yisrael. That Bnei Yisrael should be the place where Hashem rests. Ki hadira, because this abode, this apartment, this dwelling place, la mitasa, in truth, he dafka keshi nasis al yedei zichuch pnimi shel adam. Because in truth, this can only happen when there is a inner and true refinement of the person. Zoisameris, that is to say, kasher kol koyach prati lefi mehusay v'inyanei nase miyuchad melakus. When every aspect and every sub-aspect of the person becomes one with Hashem. So it's not enough that, generally speaking, the Yid should be nisbatel. The Yid should be in a state of bittul to Hashem. But every aspect of the Jew has to be refined and in this way united with Hashem. Biram, in truth. Mitzat kavanas hadira kefi shehi kavyachal batzmusay, from the perspective of the intention of this abode for Hashem, the way it is found in Hashem's essence. Ein shayach geder shel ribui v'hefech haribui. So essentially, there is no place for multiplicity, for diversity, for plurality. And it's not even possible on this level, on the level of Atzmos, of Hashem, at the essence of Hashem, at the essence where there is this unqualified Achdus. It's not even possible for there to be felt, God forbid, anything that is outside of this unity. But davka b'seider shtalshalos, but it's specifically when it comes down into this world, when it devolves into this world, by mitzdam tzeim or ein sof baruch hu, and in that process, the unending light of Hashem contracts and becomes concentrated. V'ratza Hashem sha'olam yivorei be'emtzos asara ma'imoros. And Hashem wanted specifically that the world should be created through the agency of 10 utterances. And each one of these 10 utterances has many words and many letters. Although Hashem could have created the world with only one utterance, with one fiat. Ad Lanasa Adam Lashon Rabin. And the fact that the Eibishter created the world dafka through 10 utterances and not one gives rise to the multiplicity of this world, so much so even to the idea of Naaseh Adam, that a person should think that Hashem has a committee, a presidium, and together they're going to make man. And Sham Mizgala V'Nikar Kishayish Haribai Hu Machdus Yisbarach. And Hashem wanted the dafka within the multiplicity and the multifariousness should be apprehended and should be revealed that the source of it all is one thing. V'chi kavanas hadirahi shetiyase al yedei hazichu chapati shel koyach b'fnimi atzmai, b'fnei atzmai. And this is the kavan of the dira, that this revelation and this recognition should come about through the individualized and differentiated refinement of each of the inner aspects and energies of a person. Ke'ez, now at this moment, after we have learned the above, Yuvana hevdel ha'omer ben ha'lashon b'maimer hazal b'mishno ben lashon ha'kasuf. Now we're in a position to understand and to appreciate the difference between the terminologies used in the Mishnah and then in the pasuk that's brought as a proof text. B'Torah shebichtav. So in Torah shebichtav, kifi shani nichtav, the way Hashem's name is written, nikar kol inyan kifi shehu b'sharsha. There, the way it's written in the Torah shebichtav, it's a reflection of how things are at their source. B'pnimius hakavana, in the innermost strata of the intention. U'b'sharish hanyanim hakavana hi leman tzidkai. And now going back to our pasuk in the Mishnah, at the source of inyanim, the intention is actually leman tzidkai, for Hashem's righteousness. Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Omnam, however, kifisha inyan yoredu miskala v'nimshal b'Torah shebal peh, but how this comes down and is revealed and is drawn down in Torah shebal peh, al derech ani nikra, the way in which I am read. So, for instance, we know in the Torah, the name of Hashem, the famous name of Hashem, is written in one way, but we pronounce it a completely different way. It's written Yud, Hey, followed by a Vav and Hey, but we pronounce it Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud. Sham ba lidei bitui ki ratza Kadosh Baruch Hu l'zakai says Yisrael. So in the way things come down, in the way they trickle down, on that level, we see that it's about Hashem wanting to give us merit, or give us additional refinement. Kifi shehem kavyachol metzius b'fnei atzma. This reflects the way in which we are kavyachol, as it were, in our perception, separate and apart from Hashem. U'bedarga zu nageya zichur hakeches haprotim l'zakais es Yisrael. So maybe one way of explaining this is that there are two sides to this coin. And on one side of the coin, there's the way it is in the shirish, there's the way it is in the source, in the essence of Hashem. And there it's about Sitkoi, his righteousness. But on the other side of the coin, it's the way it comes down into this world and it relates to us, and the way in which Hashem wants to make us meritorious, or Alpipnimius wants to refine us. Zeu Gama Hevdel, and now we're in a position to understand the difference between habituim ratza v'chafetz. Now we can understand the difference between the concepts of ratzain and chafetz. And this is something that's discussed at great length in other places in Chassidus. We're not going to go into great length here, not in this sikha, but in many other places. This same concept that we're going to learn is referred to as chitzonius haratzain and pnimius haratzain, the external will and the innermost will. Ratza The term ratza, translated as will, mita'er tnuas haratzin, kefi shehi nimsheches, u'b'merutza l'davar hanirtza. The term ratza, will, describes an overture. It describes a stirring of desire, the way in which it comes down, and a desire that expresses itself to a certain thing, l'davar hanirtza. And therefore, this term is applied when we're talking about what Hashem wanted to do with Bnei Israel. The chafetz, the desire, hu hatanuk sheberatzayin, is the pleasure that is inherent in this will. V'lachein Hashem chafetz l'man tzidkai. And therefore, when it talks about Hashem, it uses the term chafetz. Let's do one more paragraph and then we'll explain. Hahevdel beinehem. So what's the difference between ratzain and chafetz? So far we said that ratzain is a will towards something external, and chafetz bespeaks inner, inherent, intrinsic desire that is tied up with a pleasure. What's the difference? We can understand it when we look at the way this is true in our own lives. Ratzain, will, Ratzain is always about being drawn to something that is outside of you. This is different than when you talk about chayfetz and tainug. Now you're talking about something that is tied up with a person's pleasure. Let's talk about a couple of examples. It's true that you could reward a person, a child, an older person, with something that is external or extraneous to their self. You could buy them a present. You could give them stars on a chart. You could buy them a treat, etc., etc. But the deepest kind of reward is actually by saying something that validates who they most want to be. So when you say to somebody, wow, that was this, that, and the other, and this correlates to who they want to be seen as, now you have touched something much deeper. A different example. The need, and therefore the inherent, intrinsic, endemic desire of each person is to have a place to live. So much so that the Gemara says that if a person doesn't have a house, they're not considered a person. That's chayfetz. That's tainuk. But what the house should look like, that's already ratzin. That's already a more chitzoniistic aspect of ratzin. And that is going to depend on a person's ideas about what their house should look like, who they're comparing themselves to, what they've been exposed to in the past. One person could live in a hovel and feel very, very happy. One person could live in a palace and still feel like it's not enough. Okay, so that can help us understand a little bit the difference between inherent desire that is connected to the deepest pleasure or need within us, as opposed to ratzin. And you could even say that that's why everybody is in a shtickle tizzy and a mess, because the whole Instagram feeds the ratzin hachitzoni and not the ratzin hapnimi. So you have to make, on a fast day, you have to make the cinnamon buns. Now it became a mitzvah daraisa because everybody else on Instagram is making cinnamon buns, and you need these boots, and you need this tchotchke, and you need the other tchotchke. And if you don't buy this kind of meat and you don't buy these kinds of flours, then what's going to be? But this is not really what makes us tick. So it's just feeding a greater problem where people think, okay, I'm going to spend more money, I'm going to have this, and then I'm going to be happy. It's not going to happen. But okay, enough geplayed. I'm sorry. So that's the difference between Ratzon and Chayfetz. And from this flows the difference. So in Ratzon, there's going to be a million differences. Don't think that what they tell you on Instagram you need today is going to be tomorrow. No, this whole thing is powered by gluttony and a need to sell stuff. So tomorrow you're going to need something completely different. It's going to conform to the things that you're drawn to and to the level of your connection to them. But when you're talking about tainug, when you're talking about an innermost desire that is connected, tainug means pleasure. Here you're talking about the soul taking pleasure in itself, not superimposed on it, not an overlay. Now I'm going to buy another shmat, and now I'm going to be happy. I'm going to buy another thing, I'm going to be happy. Ein chiluk mahi sibas hatainuk. It's not, the tainuk doesn't come from something, it's only triggered, but that's not the cause. Ki hakesher shel hatainuk einai im oisei gorim ela im hanefesh atzma. Because the tainug is actually caused only by the nefesh itself. It's inherent. Yes, it's triggered by a compliment somebody might give you, or words of affirmation or validation, but it doesn't come from that. So these two madrigas, this binary, exists generally speaking in Torah mitzvahs. There's the way the Torah exists above in heaven, on a level that transcends multiplicity and differentiation. And then there's the way the Torah comes down and devolves here into this world. And on that level, there's multiplicity and there's differentiation. And this comes to expression in the difference between Torah and mitzvahs. Because when you compare Torah and mitzvahs, Torah compared to mitzvahs is all about achdus. As is known, Torah is compared to blood. And blood is a systemic system. It's everywhere in the same way, everywhere in the body. Mitzvahs are compared to limbs. And each limb and each organ has different parameters and has different specs, as it were, and it has a different construct. It's different. So Torah is about unity. Mitzvahs is more an expression of multiplicity. However, okay, hold on to your seat now. This is amazing. It's dafka when the Torah comes down and in its multiplicity and differentiation in order to refine us. But because it's coming down, because this is a reflection of Hashem's innermost desire because of his righteousness, because it's tied up with Hashem's intention and with his pleasure, mistaisef al yedei zeh ilui gam b'madrega haTorah kafi she'eh l'mayla. So now there is added and amplified to the greatness of the Torah that is above. In other words, not only is this not a descent, because the Eibishter has Rahmanis on his children, and so he allows his Torah to come down. And when it comes down, there's a splintering and there's a multiplicity, etc. Not only does this not impact the Torah in any deleterious way, but on the contrary, it adds in Madriga, it adds and it augments Yagdil Torah v'Yadir. It amplifies the greatness of the Torah. More than the Torah is as it is above. What happens through this is that there is a hamshacha, there is a drawing down of the infinite in Torah. Well, so not that I am qualified to speak to this at all, but on the most simple level, of course, when we talk about the Eibishter, there's constantly different madrigas and different madrigas and different madrigas and different madrigas, right? So the Torah is one with Hashem, but there's a level above it, Ein Sof. And when the Torah comes down, and we, little tiny nothings, with all of our frailties and our limitations and our foibles, when we keep the Torah, there is an amplification of the greatness of the Torah that infuses an aspect of Ein Sof in Torah. And like what's explained in Kabbalah, that David HaMelech used to be mechaber the Torah as it's above, with the level of Kutchabrichu. And the level of Kutchabrichu is already a level that is connected to this world. And now we can really understand the difference in the terminology used by Chazal and the terminology used in Tanakh. B'Torah shebechtav misbataz dargas haTorah shelamayla. In Torah shebechtav is expressed the level of Torah, the way it is above this world, bechinas haklal shebetorah, the most general aspect of the Torah, hana'alis miriboy v'hischalkos, that transcends and that is higher than differentiation and multiplicity. Shalachein b'Torah shebechsav kol hamitzvos b'mitzvah say b'mitzvah say hein stumais v'loy mefarashos ugluyos v'yadois. Because when you look in Torah shebechtav, whether it's mitzvah say, whether it's mitzvah leisa say, the mitzvahs are presented in a way that's really obscure. They're really indistinct. You don't have the details. You don't even have the largest idea of the mitzvahs. It's not revealed. It's not known. Ve'ilu b'Torah shebal peh misgala bechinas hariboy v'hischalkos hamitzvos. But in Torah shebal peh, that's where you get the details, because that's where you get the aspect of the Torah that is about differentiation. Ulefichach Torah shebechtav miva'ares keitzad misbatas hashlomas hakavana shel Hashem chafetz l'man tzidkei. And therefore, the Torah shebechtav explains how is the fulfillment of Hashem's desire expressed. B'Torah shelamayla, in the Torah that's above. Hanalis mi ribuy v'hischalkos, that is higher than multiplicity and diversity. Ubemadrega zu, and on this level, ha'hagdala b'Torah hi be'echos. Now the Rebbe is answering another question. On the level upstairs of Torah that transcends this world, the amplification that is effected through the Torah mitzvahs that we do here is be'echos. It's qualitative. Yagdil Torah v'yadir. The Torah is made greater and amplified and more glorious. I'm going to skip the brackets for now. Ve'ilu b'Torah sheba'al peh, but in the Torah sheba'al peh, ba begilui keitzad nishlemes kavana zu b'madrega shel hir b'lehem Torah mitzvahs. But the Torah sheba'al peh speaks to our experience down here, where there is hischalkos, there is separation, there is diversity, there is multiplicity. Therefore, it uses the term here, balahem, Hashem gave us an abundance. We'll go back to the brackets if we have time. See if you'd base. Bezem, move on. And through this is understood. Gam, also, madua nema yagdil Torah b'yadeh b'loshen osid. Why it says the Torah will be made more great and more glorious in the future. V'loi higdil Torah b'ha'adira. And not in the past. Hashem made great and glorious. Mishum she'oisa hagdala b'hadara b'Torah shebechtav b'sharshay l'mayla. Because the amplification and the exaltedness of the Torah shebechtav, the way it is in its source above, nasis dafka al yedei ula achar shehir b'lehem Torah mitzvos, because that exaltedness upstairs comes only after our work downstairs, after Hashem gave us many mitzvos, a lot of Torah. Bishlav boy nimshachos hamitzvos mizgalis al yedei Torah sheba'al peh. And this shlav, this stage, is only drawn down and revealed through the mitzvahs and through Torah. Sheba'al peh. Hagdala b'Torah nasis eifoi ba'asit. So the real amplification and greatness and exaltness of the Torah is done in the future. Yagdil Torah b'yadir. La'achrei shemirimiza ba'araisa. After, from what is just alluded in the Torah, ba'haTorah sheba'al peh v'limuda hamevi l'dei ma'aseh. So the true amplification and greatness of the Torah and its glory is only affected after the Torah sheba'al peh comes and explains all the details, and it is studied, and it leads to action. And this also very much correlates with a simple explanation of this pasuk Yagdil Torah b'yader sheyiyah la'asid lavai, and the Radak explains that this will be in la'asid lavai. So it's mishum she'amitis gilui zeh yerak asher yushlam b'poel hatalich shel zakais Yisrael, because the truth is that the ultimate greatness and glory and amplification of Hashem's Torah will only be at the completion of the whole journey of refining Bnei Yisrael. Hamizbatze, which will be affected and accomplished al yedei hir b'lehem Torah mitzvos, but it will only come to fruition la'asid lavai. And we're still en route. We're still in the process. Yud Gimel. Al pi kol hanal, based on all of the above, nitan gam levar es shaychus hamishna Reb Chananya ben Akashya Omer le Pirkei Avos. And now we circle back. So what's the connection between this Mishnah, which comes from a totally different part of Mishnayos, to Pirkei Avos? Pirkei Avos is what we learn as a preparation to Matan Torah and to Chag HaShavuos. Habartanura Kaisev b'tchilas Perushai leMeseches Avos. The Bartanura writes at the beginning of his explanation to Meseches Avos, to Pirkei Avos, Lefisha Meseches zu eina miyusedes al pi mitzvah mitzvahs haTorah kishar Mesechta shebemishna. Bartanura explains that Pirkei Avos is not based on one aspect of halacha like all the other Mesechtas. All the other Mesechtas have an area of focus. You have Sukkos, you have Rosh Hashanah, you have Tares, you have Negais, you have different aspects. Shebe Mishnah, Ela, Kula, Musarim, Umidais, V'chachmei Wasa'elam. Because this part of Mishnah is comprised of teachings about acting properly and having the right attributes. And the truth of the matter is that all of this, or much of it, was conveyed by Chachmei Umas Ha'olam, by smart people who are not Jewish of the world. Gam kein chavru sfarim kemoi shabadu milibam bedarche hamusar. Ketzad yisnaheg ha'adam im chaverei. They also wrote books like this that came from their hearts about musar, giving us admonition and direction, how to act im chaverei with another person. And therefore, lefichach, because there are other books that can guide you in how to be a good person, a kind person, a decent person, and so on and so forth. Therefore, Pirkei Avos begins with that Moshe received this Torah from Sinai, lamar lecha, to tell you, shahamidos v'hamusarim shebezu hameseches lo badu oisem chachmei hamishna malibam ela af elu nemru b'Sinai. Just to make sure that you understand that this is not stuff that the Chachmei HaMishnah belched out of their hearts or their elbows. This also came from Har Sinai. Ba'akvos kach alula lis'er she'ela. So then there could arise a question. Hayos umusarim umidos misug zeh kayamim b'sifreim shel Chachmei u'Masa'elam. Since books like these that present good advice about how to comport yourself already exist, they already exist. So why address this at Sinai as part of Torah? It already exists. So Abba says this question is addressed by this Mishnah with which we preface learning Pirkei Avos. Inyan haTorah mitzvos hu lezacher es kol koches umidas ha'adam. Because the purpose of Torah mitzvahs is to refine every one of our koches, every one of our energies, every one of our aspects, every one of our attributes. Umitam zeh gam hamusarim umidas, and therefore, even things that deal with common decency, common courtesy, etc., nemru b'Sinai kechelek haTorah, we're told at Sinai as part of the Torah. Ki matarasan eina rak lohidia ketzad yisnaheg ha'adam im chaverei. Because the purpose is not just to teach us nimus, just to teach us good manners. No, that's not why it comes to us. I'm sorry, I lost my place. Sorry. Ela be'ikar, but mainly this is taught to us, lifal es bira v'zicha chamidas, to effectuate the refinement and perhaps the crystallization of our midas, of our attributes, shezeh yitachin rak kashahem nichlalois behirbo lehem Torah mitzvos. True refinement, true evolving, perhaps spiritually, this can only happen through the fact that Hashem gave us abundant of Torah mitzvahs. Ki dafka oz yesh bekoichan lezachich es protei hamidus v'hakoiches v'la'asoisam kelim la'elakus. Yes, you want to learn pedestrian manners, that you could learn from other sources. But if you want to be a refined vessel for godliness, that's only possible through Hirba Lehem Torah mitzvahs. Hashem gave us so many different mitzvahs and so many aspects of Torah, inclusive of aspects of Torah that maybe certain things we could find in other places. But it's not the same. And the final Seif Yudalit, Ach, Adayin Drusha Tesefes Bir, but we still need a little bit more explanation. Ketzadi Techin Leimar, Shenyana Shel HaTorah Hu Lifal Azichuch Midas V'Koiches Adam. How is it possible to say that the whole purpose of Torah is to affect the refinement of our midas and our koiches? We could understand if we were talking about the refinement of the neshama. Shekein shayrish haneshama is na'ala mi shayrish haTorah, because we know that the root, the source of the neshama is higher than the source of Torah. Kedivrei Chazal, like the Chazal taught us, machshavasan shel Yisrael kadma l'chol davar, that the thought of Bnei Yisrael alighted in Hashem's thought process, kav yachal, as it were, before anything else. Afilu l'Torah, even before Torah. Omnam, however, the hetem l'klal shahamaisa ikar, but in consonance with the rule that the most important thing is action, midubar kan it is birur v'zichach midasa hativya shel hanefesh habahamis. So we must be speaking here about the refinement of the aspect, the natural aspect of our animal soul, inclusive of the refinement of the limbs of our actual body. That when you look topically, externally, the body of a Jew does not seem to be different than the body of a non-Jew. So so how is it possible to postulate that the main purpose and the goal of the Torah on its highest level is for the purpose of refining the energies and the aspects of the body and the animal soul? In order to explain this, now we understand why we say the Mishnah, Kol Yisrael yesh lam chelek olam haba. Every Jew has a place in Olam Haba. Ha'olam haba amar b'mishnasai eina gan eden. The Olam Haba that is referred to in this Mishnah is not referring to Gan Eden. It's speaking about after Mashiach comes, what's called Olam Hatchiyah, when Neshamas come back in Gufim. For all of Oimim Asher Kol Yisrael Yeshlam Chelek Olam Haba. Everybody is coming back. Kol Yisrael. Ki Kol Yehudi. Because every Jew, Gam Mitzad Gufoy, even just from the perspective of his body, is a planting of my hand, Hashem says, in which I take great pride. And as is well known, especially for us after last class, when we read the poem about the Bechiras HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that true choice belongs only to Hashem. It's unadulterated, it's unfettered, it's not impacted by anything else. Shebechiras HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that the choice that Hashem's choosing us, she'amitis iner bechiruhu ba'atzmos, and as we learned, the true inyan of bechira relates only to essence, only to atzmos, and therefore ultimately only to Hashem. Misyacheses leguf shel hayehudi. When Hashem chose the Jews, He didn't just choose our souls; He chose our bodies. Umeata. And now, once we understand this, ein tmiya b'kach asher kol inyan haTorah b'kavanasa hu l'zachis es Yisrael. So now there's no wonder, we have no question, we're no more confused about the idea that the entire kavanah of the Torah is to refine Yisrael as midoisa v'gufay hagashmiyim, the very physical aspects of us. And specifically through this, Nimshach b'Torah gam chafetz Hashem, comes down into the Torah, the innermost desire and pleasure Hashem, shebatzmusa yisbarach, that is found in His essence, v'nase yagdil Torah v'yadir. And through this, the Torah is made greater and more exalted and amplified. Could you please look at footnote 74? I know it's late, but we just have to read this. Re'ei Teir Sholem Sham, Mipiskome Rabbeinu Hazaken. The Alter Rebbe used to say, Minhat Kain Hasaganit. We have no idea. Wie es ist Teir B'Hashem Yisbarach der Guf von Ayidin. How precious the body of a Jew is to the Eibishter. So next time when you're feeling like another potato, and another kugel, and another kugel, and that, it's all feeding the bodies of Yidden, and we have no idea how precious this is to the Eibishter. So wishing everybody a wonderful week ahead, a productive week. We should get everything done on our list much more quickly than we could ever imagine. And are there any questions or outstanding things we have to tie up?
Rivky, could you tie up the end one more time, please? The idea of the guf, just.
Okay. So the idea of the guf, wait, so let me open up the sikh 1 second. Okay. So in the last if the Rebbe says, but still, after everything is said and done, how can we say that the sum total of the Torah is in order to refine us? Really? That's the sum total. And he says, B'meila, I could understand it if you're talking about the neshama, to refine the neshama. Because we know that the neshama, the idea of a neshama, the desire for neshamas of Yisrael, that precedes even the Torah. So there's a hierarchy. So we could understand how the Torah should serve the purpose of the neshama. But if we're going to be consistent, and if we belong to a theology that says Hamaisa hu ha'ikar, the main thing is the action, and the action can only be done by the guf. So we have to say that the zichuch, that the refinement, is not talking about the neshama alone. It's talking about the refinement of the body. And the body, when you look at it at first blush, when you look at it externally, doesn't seem to be different than a non-Jewish body. But the Rebbe says, no, it's not true. Because when the Eibishter created us, when he wanted the idea of a Jew, he chose not only the soul, but also the body. And in order to answer this question, we say, Kol Yisrael yesh lam chelek l'olam haba. And the Rebbe brings down that this is not talking about Gan Eden. If it was talking about Gan Eden, that's a place only for neshamas. That is luxury hotel for neshamas, top notch. But we're not talking about that, because this Olam Haba is talking about Olam Hatchiyah. Olam Hatchiyah is after Mashiach comes, will be neshamas and gufim. So if it says Kol Yisrael yesh lam chelek Olam Haba, every Jew is coming back, that means that every guf is precious and pure and holy. And in the footnote, the Rebbe brings down that what the Alter Rebbe used to say, that we have no concept, we have no idea of how precious this is to the Eibishter.
Excellent, thank you. Beautiful.
Beyond, we're just so privileged. It's really, really amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wishing everybody tov, and again a refuah shlema ukreva to Harav Yosef Yitzchak ben Sima Chasya, and a schus for the Rach Hanimel, for the little boy, Ayach Yamim Veshanim Teves, Aryeh Lev ben Amira Liora.
Amen.
Everybody have a wonderful, wonderful day. Kol tov.
Thank you.